Hi, I'm Dennis Phillips, and welcome to Everyday Reloading and Shooting. So this is the target I'll be shooting today. I've got 100 rounds loaded with 223 60 grain VMAX with 23 grains of Accurate 2460. This load has produced a group of 0.75 inches at 100 yards. So I'm going to be testing shooting styles today. For the top 10 targets, I'm going to shoot with my hand laid across the scope. For the bottom 10 targets, I'm going to be shooting with my hand behind the trigger, not holding the scope. And we'll see if that makes any difference, those two styles in the groups. So I've brought a lot of 10 round magazines already loaded up, so I'm not going to have to be reloading after each group, so that should make this go a little more quickly. So I've shot the first 10 groups with my hand resting on the scope. I'm going to shoot the next 10 groups with my hand behind the trigger guard. Okay, so for the first 10 groups, when I was shooting, I was holding the rifle like this. With my hand on top of the scope supporting the rifle. For the last 10 groups, I was holding the rifle like this with my hand behind the trigger. And I haven't measured them yet, but it seems like the second method has worked out better. So I'm going to measure those groups, we'll compare, and I'll let you know. And so I'm going to measure these, and then I'm going to average them out to see which of the two methods compared better. On the one hand, you could possibly say that, well, by the time you got to this last row of groups, you were already warmed up and you were already in the zone. Your rifle was shooting better. So these do look better. I haven't measured them yet, but they do look like better groupings. And I think there's probably something to be said for the fact that if my hand is not on the scope, then I'm less likely to be moving the scope. So, okay, I've got the results measured out and analyzed. To reiterate, this was a 60 grain VMAX with 23 grains of Accurate 2460 powder, shot out of a Ruger American.223 at 100 yards at the Georgia Gun Club indoor range. And the test was to determine the best posture for holding the rifle. So the two groups of 5 across the top of the target were shot with my hand steadying the scope. My left hand was on the scope and my elbow was on the bench. The two bottom rows were shot with my hand behind the trigger guard, holding near my right hand at the grip. So here are the groups. The first two groups were identical at 1.24 inches, 1.12, 0.64, 0.78. That row averaged 1 inch exactly. The second group, 1.06, 0.89, 1.14, 0.9276. The row averaged 0.95. The gun had been cleaned. Maybe it's getting a little fouled. Maybe the barrel's warming up. But in any event, the second row was better. These, again, were with my left hand on the scope and my elbow on the bench. The last two rows, I was at 0.73, 0.89, 0.76, 0.70, and 0.61. I had a row average of 0.74 on that row of 5-shot groups. And then on the last row, it opened up a little. Maybe the barrel was getting dirty. Maybe I was getting tired. 0.91. Here's a group of 0.51. I hated to have to put that 1 there. And then 1.0, 1.01, and 1.20. So we had a row average of 0.93. So on the first two rows, we had targets 1 through 10 had an average of 0.98 with my left hand holding onto the scope. On targets number 11 through 20, without my hand on the scope and near my right hand behind the trigger guard, the group was 0.83. So that tells me my posture that I'll be shooting from in future trips to the range. I obviously shoot better with my left hand behind the trigger guard. Okay, so maybe you look at that target and the way it was set up and how I conducted that test, and you say, gee, that's really tedious. It looks like a lot of work. I don't know if I want to go to that much effort. You can do this with a lot less effort. For me, this is a hobby, and I'm trying to learn as much as I can about shooting, and I'm trying to be the best I can. I'm looking for that magic load that's going to get me down to a 1/2 inch group size, which I had one in this bunch, 0.51 inches. My goal, my purpose in shooting is to try to shoot 1/2 inch groups at 100 yards, and I'm looking for a way to do that, maybe even shoot 1-hole groups at 100 yards. And so something like this, I'm studying, I've heard different views on how to hold a rifle. And so by conducting this test, I shot 100 rounds. I did 50 shots holding it one way, and I did 50 shots holding it the other way. And the 50 shots holding it the other way definitely showed a better pattern. Not just marginally better, but drastically better. Overall, it lowered my group size 0.15 of an inch. Anyway, I'm very pleased. Both of these averaged under an inch, regardless of how you held the rifle, but holding it with your hand behind the trigger guard, the averages were much better there. And it just makes sense logically. And you could say, well, maybe you were just getting warmed up. Maybe you were just getting into your zone. Maybe after shooting 20 groups, maybe your aim was getting a little better. Maybe your trigger action was improving. Maybe so, that's part of it. The only other way I can think of to maybe alternate, so if you're improving, you would be improving it both groups all along. So I mean, that would be something maybe to consider. But for now, it seems like I have better results with that than trying to steady the scope with my hand. Because when you're touching the scope, there's always going to be that tendency to move it just a little bit, even if you don't even realize that you are. So hands off seems to be the better policy that works, at least on this particular test. So this will help me in my future shooting and hopefully make me a better shooter. All right. I hope you enjoyed watching. Thanks for watching.